The fire crackled softly, its flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls of the Gryffindor common room. A familiar warmth embraced the air, filling the space with a sense of calm. Yet, beneath the comfort, there was something else. A pulse, a quiet thrum, almost as if the very walls of Hogwarts were whispering secrets to those willing to listen. The flickering of the fire seemed to beckon, pulling you toward something far beyond the mundane, something far darker. You've felt it before, the longing, the pull, the call of adventure, woven into the very air of this ancient castle. It's the sort of feeling that makes your heart race, your pulse quicken, a quiet hunger for something more than the daily routines, the endless classes, and the well-worn paths that everyone else walks. It's a yearning for the unknown, a need to feel the weight of danger, to discover the forbidden corners of the world, the kind of adventure that isn't found in textbooks or cauldrons, but in the shadows, hidden from sight, waiting for the brave to stumble upon it. And tonight, it calls to you again. The night has settled in, and the common room is filled with the soft murmur of students relaxing, their faces glowing in the firelight. But in the silence between the crackles, you can hear it, the faintest whisper of something deeper, darker. It's almost as if Hogwarts itself is alive, watching, waiting. For who? For you? It's hard to tell, but the more you sit there, the more you realize. This feeling is not one you can ignore. Not tonight. There's a familiar pull in your chest, a curiosity so sharp it cuts through the haze of your thoughts. It begins with a single word, just a murmur in the distance. Restricted section. Your eyes narrow, your heart skips a beat. The mention of those forbidden books locked away behind iron gates and ancient spells always carried with it a sense of both danger and thrill. The whispers around school about these books have always been hushed, and for good reason. Magic, cursed objects, spells so old and powerful that they've been sealed away for centuries. To venture there is to step into a world of danger, a place where those who seek knowledge often find their fate is sealed in ways they never anticipated. But something is different tonight. Something is pulling you in. As you sit there, lost in your own thoughts, the flickering flames cast a red hue over the room. The heat from the fire is comforting, yet your skin prickles with an electric tension. It's as if the warmth from the hearth is trying to ward off the cold, the creeping dread that stirs deep within. It's subtle at first, a strange feeling that something is waiting just beyond your sight, something ancient, dark, and full of secrets. But you don't want to look away. You can't. Your fingers tap against the arm of the chair, the rhythm of your thoughts quickening. The question, unspoken yet hanging in the air like the smoke rising from the fire, is clear. What if this is the night? The night when you finally unravel the mystery that has haunted you. The night when you slip past the boundaries, when you cross the line and discover the things that others fear. You know what it's like to be drawn to the edge, the unknown. But what would it feel like to step beyond that edge? There's a brief moment of hesitation, a flicker of doubt. The rules are there for a reason, aren't they? The school is built on centuries of tradition and magic, meant to protect you from what lies beyond. The restricted section is forbidden, after all. But still, the call grows louder. The walls around you seem to close in just a bit tighter, and the flickering of the flames grows dimmer. It's almost as if the castle itself is waiting for your decision. Your thoughts are interrupted by the sudden rustle of a parchment nearby, the crack of a distant book opening. It's Leo, sitting across the room, immersed in his own world of charms and transfiguration. He's never one to shy away from a challenge, always thinking a few steps ahead. His quick wit and sharp mind, a perfect match for the puzzles and mysteries that Hogwarts tends to throw his way. And tonight, you realize he might just be the person you need. You glance toward him, the decision already starting to form in your mind. Leo is the kind of friend who thrives on the impossible, the daring, the dangerous. He's never backed down from an adventure, especially not one that could get them into trouble. He's the kind of person who could help you unlock the secrets of the restricted section. Someone who can think on his feet when the odds seem insurmountable. But more than that, he's the kind of friend who makes the journey feel less like a risk and more like an opportunity. But even with Leo by your side, there's that creeping unease. The tension in the air is thick now, almost suffocating. Your thoughts spiral as the clock ticks on, the sound of the fire in the hearth becoming distant in your mind. There's something about tonight, something that feels different from all the other times you've considered sneaking into places you shouldn't. You take a deep breath, your hand gripping the edge of the chair, your pulse racing. The call of the adventure is louder now. It's a whisper that echoes through the halls of Hogwarts, carried on the wind and the shadows. And no matter how much you try to push it away, it's growing stronger. It's time to answer. The unfinished essay. The glow of the fire in the Gryffindor common room was a comfort, but not enough to banish the gnawing sense of frustration that clung to you. Your homework. That essay on defense against the dark arts sat untouched before you. Its title, in theory, Identification and Defense, was scrawled at the top of the parchment, a mockery of your lack of progress. The words taunted you, staring up from the paper with a smug, unyielding certainty that you would never finish it. It was a topic you should have easily understood by now, but instead, it seemed as foreign as the walls around you. The warm glow of the fire bathed the room in reds and golds, giving the stone walls an almost comforting sheen. The air smelled of old parchment, the faint sweetness of cinnamon drifting from the enchanted candles hanging above. A few stray, half-melted marshmallows floated lazily in your cocoa, drifting like snowflakes in an autumn breeze. Everything about the Gryffindor common room spoke of peace and safety, and yet your thoughts kept wandering far from your work. You glanced around. Students sat scattered across the room, some reading, others playing wizard's chess. The sound of pieces clicking against the board was oddly soothing, but it only reminded you of how much you wished to be anywhere but here, in this very moment. The fireplace crackled, the flames casting playful shadows on the ceiling, and for a fleeting moment, you thought of leaving it all behind, walking out into the night, into the unknown. But no, you had to finish your essay. Your quill drooped in your hand like a weary traveler, the ink barely sticking to the paper as you tapped it absent-mindedly against the desk. You'd been staring at the same sentence for what felt like hours, and still, nothing came. Not one coherent thought, let alone the insight into how to defend against dark creatures like the infiltrate, the very subject of the assignment. You sighed, slouching back in your chair, setting the quill down and rubbing your eyes. Your gaze drifted to the fire again, mesmerized by the dancing flames. The heat was so inviting, pulling you into its embrace. You almost felt as though you could drift off right there, lulled into a soft, drowsy stupor. But you couldn't. You couldn't give in to the urge to nap when you had an essay to finish. Shimmer, your cat, padded over to your side, her silver fur catching the flickering light of the fire. Her soft purring was a gentle reminder that, despite the mountain of work you still had ahead of you, there were small comforts to be found. She nudged the back of your hand with a delicate push of her nose, as though reminding you she was there to offer some sort of solace. You reached down to scratch behind her ears, the action automatic, but it brought a brief moment of peace. Her fur was soft, soothing, as if trying to pull you out of the whirlpool of frustration. Her tiny, delicate purrs vibrated through the air, a comforting reminder that there were still things worth enjoying in the world, even if an unfinished essay was pressing down on you like a weight. As you scratched her, you glanced at the assignment again. In theory, identification and defense. You tried to recall what you had learned in class, but your mind kept drifting away from the pages, away from the homework, to the shadows in the corners of the room. There was something else in the air tonight, something that made the homework feel trivial in comparison to what might lie beyond the familiar walls of this common room. A quiet noise broke through your thoughts. Whispers, soft but insistent. You straightened in your chair, heart skipping a beat. The voices weren't loud enough to hear clearly, but they were there, and they seemed out of place. You leaned back, trying to look casual, stretching your arms above your head to give the impression that you were merely taking a break from the essay. But your eyes, sharp as ever, darted across the room, locking onto the figures by the fire. It was Vance Dupont, a notorious troublemaker, standing with one of his cronies near the hearth. He was talking low, his voice a quiet rumble that only someone paying close attention could catch. Normally, you would have ignored him. After all, Vance was always up to something. He lived for breaking the rules, thriving on the chaos he created. But tonight, there was something different in the way he spoke, something that drew your attention. Restricted section. You heard him say the words hanging in the air, sending a jolt of curiosity through you. You sat up straighter, the unfinished essay now forgotten. You had to focus. You had to know more. You tried to listen more intently, but the crackling fire and the distant murmur of students talking made it impossible to catch every word. You glanced at your wand, half hidden in the pocket of your robe. It was tempting to cast a spell to eavesdrop, but you hesitated. Subtlety had never been your strongest suit, but you knew Leo, your best friend, the Ravenclaw genius, would be up for this if there was anyone who could make sense of a situation like this. It was him. Brilliance and recklessness often shared the same roots, and Leo embodied both. With him, anything felt possible. The murmurs from Vance became clearer as you focused, the words now unmistakable in the quiet room. My dad told me about it, a book in the restricted section. It's got legendary hexes, powerful ones, magic Hogwarts doesn't even teach anymore. Your heart skipped again, a sense of excitement thrumming in your chest. You knew about the restricted section. Everyone did. It was off limits to students for a reason. But a book like that, powerful spells, hexes long forgotten by time. Those were the things legends were made of. Those were the things that could change everything. What if you were the one to find it? A slow, wicked grin spread across your face as the plan began to form in your mind. But you couldn't do it alone. No, you needed Leo. You needed someone clever, someone who could think quickly when things inevitably went awry. And Leo, with his bright mind and tendency to take risks, was the perfect partner for this kind of adventure. You stood up abruptly, brushing aside your half-finished essay, leaving it to mock you from the table. No more distractions. No more procrastination. It was time for a different kind of story to unfold. The fire crackled behind you, as though urging you on, and with a final glance at Shimmer, who was still lounging contentedly by the fire, you grabbed your things, ready to find Leo. After all, Hogwarts was waiting, and so was a much darker, far more dangerous mystery. The whispered secret, the warmth of the common room seemed to fade as your mind wandered deeper into the shadows of the conversation you had just overheard. The fire crackled steadily, but it was as if the sound had lost its comforting charm. Everything else seemed so distant now. The rustle of pages, the soft clink of wizards' chess pieces, the murmurs of classmates, until once again your attention snapped back to the whispers. Restricted section. The words hung in the air like a spell, as if the very mention of them had breathed life into the room's stillness. You leaned forward in your seat, trying to appear casual, but inside, your pulse was quickening. Restricted section. The very phrase sent a shiver down your spine. That was the place where magic was sealed away, where the forbidden knowledge of the past lay locked in books so dangerous that even the bravest wizards dared not open them. The very idea of the place, the heavy iron gates, the enchanted locks, the dark shadows lurking between the shelves, had always been the stuff of whispered legends and fearful glances. But tonight, it was not just a legend. Tonight, it felt real, dangerously real. You could hear Vance's voice, just low enough to be a secret, though not secret enough to escape your ears. "My dad told me about it," he said, his words slipping through the crackling fire. A book in the restricted section. A book full of legendary hexes. Powerful magic. Hogwarts doesn't even teach anymore. Spells that no one's used for centuries. The words burned into your mind, seeping in like ink through a parchment. You felt your breath catch in your chest, your heart beating faster than it had in ages. Powerful hexes, magic long forgotten by the school, spells so ancient they had been hidden away. This was exactly the kind of adventure you had always dreamed of, but it wasn't just the danger of it that captivated you. It was the idea of the book itself, a forbidden book kept behind iron gates and spells, with magic so dangerous that only the most daring or foolish students would even think of touching it. And then Vance said the words that made your blood run cold, but also set your mind alight with the spark of curiosity. "I plan on getting it before anyone else does." A slow smile curled at the corner of your lips as his words sank in. Before anyone else does. So, Vance was already plotting a way to steal the book. He didn't know what he was getting himself into. If the book really held the dark secrets he thought it did, then he'd be in more danger than he realized. But you were different. You weren't just interested in stealing a book. No, You wanted to find the truth, to uncover what was hidden, what had been locked away for centuries. And if you were the one to find it, the one to discover its secrets before anyone else, before Vance, you would write your own story. The halls of Hogwarts would whisper your name, and people would tell tales about the student who defied the rules and unearthed forbidden knowledge. You stood up from your chair, suddenly restless, your heart pounding with the adrenaline of 1,000 possibilities. You couldn't ignore this. This was it, the adventure you had been waiting for, and the thought of getting to it before Vance, of being the one to unearth its power, was enough to make the air seem electric, like the promise of magic was just within reach. But you couldn't go it alone. This was too dangerous. It wasn't just about breaking into the restricted section. It was about surviving what lay within. You needed someone who could think fast, who could help you outwit the professors, dodge the prefects, and deal with the darker things that might be hiding in the shadows of the library. You needed Leo. You moved swiftly across the common room, your eyes never leaving Vance as he stood there by the fire, smug and oblivious. He was so confident, so certain that he would be the one to claim the book. But that confidence, you knew, would be his downfall. You weren't about to let him beat you to it. The door to the dormitory loomed ahead, and as you crossed the threshold, the coolness of the stone walls washed over you. The quiet of the dorm felt strangely out of place, now like you had stepped into a different world entirely. You needed to find Leo, now. The door creaked as you stepped inside, and there, just as you expected, was Leo. He was sprawled across his bed, a half-open book in his hands, his glasses crooked from the way he had been reading. His usual carefree expression was replaced by the familiar glint of intelligence, the calculating look that told you he was already working through something in his mind. "Leo," you said, your voice low but urgent, the excitement in your chest barely contained. He looked up, blinking as if he had been pulled from some deep thought. "What's up?" he asked, his usual curiosity piqued by your tone. You wasted no time. You told him everything. The whispers, the book in the restricted section, the powerful spells. Everything. You could see the flicker of interest in Leo's eyes, the shift in his posture as he sat up, fully alert. The silence between you two stretched for a moment, the weight of the secret hanging in the air. And then Leo grinned, a slow, almost mischievous smile spreading across his face. He knew exactly what you were getting at, and there was no doubt in his mind that he was in, without a second thought. "So," he said, his voice low and filled with amusement, "we're really doing this? Breaking into the restricted section?" He pushed his glasses up his nose, an expression of determination settling over his features. "I'm in." You couldn't suppress the thrill that rushed through you at his words. Together you and Leo were unstoppable. Where others saw boundaries and rules, you saw challenges. And tonight, those boundaries would break. The clock was ticking. The adventure you had been waiting for had begun. And soon, Hogwarts would never be the same. You took a deep breath, your mind racing with the possibilities ahead. Tonight, you would walk the fine line between legend and risk, and you would do it before anyone else had the chance to try. The plan forms. You rushed into the dormitory, barely even pausing to close the door behind you. The familiar sight of the cozy, slightly messy room greeted you, but there was no time to waste. Leo's bed was tucked in the far corner, and it was there you found him, exactly as you'd expected. tangled in sheets, a book open across his chest, glasses askew. "Leo," you hissed, urgency in your voice as you crossed the room in quick strides. Leo grumbled, shifting slightly but not quite, waking. What time is it? Are we going to Hogsmeade today?" His voice was muffled, his words trailing off in his half-sleep. "No time for Hogsmeade," you said, grabbing the nearest pillow and tossing it onto his face. "Wake up. We're going to need your brilliant mind for something much bigger." Leo shot upright at the sudden pillow attack, his eyes wide with confusion. He wiped the sleep from his eyes and then immediately squinted at you, sensing the seriousness in your tone. "Wait, are you actually awake?" Leo asked, rubbing his eyes. "Or is this another one of your weird dreams?" "I'm as awake as I've ever been." "You need to hear this," you said, the thrill of the plan already making your pulse race. Leo propped himself up on one elbow, now fully attentive. "All right, hit me with it. What's the brilliant new idea that can only be solved with reckless abandon in my genius?" You couldn't help but grin at the enthusiasm in his voice. Leo was always the one to fuel your most daring schemes, and his quick wit often turned the impossible into mere inconvenience. He was clever, resourceful, and, just as importantly, daring. In many ways, he was your perfect partner in crime. "It's Vance. He's planning to break into the restricted section," you said in one breath, leaning in closer, lowering your voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "And he's going to find the book, the one with all the forbidden spells, the one we've heard about in whispers for years. We can't let him get it first, Leo. We have to beat him to it." Leo's expression shifted instantly from sleep-induced confusion to the sharp focus you knew so well. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and sat up straighter. "Wait, Vance, Dupont is involved in something dangerous. That can only go well." His voice was dry, but you could tell he was fully awake now, his mind already working through the details. "Exactly," you said, pacing in front of him. "That's the thing. He's too reckless. He's going to get in trouble. He always does. But if we can get to the book before him, that would be a story. We could uncover magic that hasn't seen the light of day in centuries. Dangerous magic. You and I could make history." You stopped pacing and looked at Leo, the excitement in your chest building. "This is our chance, Leo. Our chance to make our names known." Leo didn't respond right away. Instead, he placed his glasses back onto his nose and leaned back slightly, deep in thought. You could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. "All right," he said slowly, drawing the word out as if testing it. "You're right about one thing. Vance isn't exactly the brightest star in the night sky. That book, legendary, and there's no way he can just waltz into the restricted section without getting caught. But we could pull this off." He shot you a knowing look. "You've been planning this, haven't you?" You didn't need to say anything. The look on your face was enough. Leo was already a step ahead of you, his mind working out the finer details. "So, here's the deal," Leo continued, leaning forward with excitement. "We know that the restricted section is off limits for students, and the head librarian, Madame Ashworth, isn't exactly the forgiving type. Getting past her, that'll be a challenge. But I'm pretty sure I know a way around that." You stopped in your tracks, eyeing him with suspicion. "What's your plan?" Leo leaned in, whispering like he was about to share a state secret. Well, remember Trixie, the fifth-year prefect. She owes me a favor. A big one. You blinked at him, slightly puzzled. Trixie, what did you do to get a fifth-year prefect to owe you a favor? Leo's grin spread wider. You don't ask questions when someone's about to fail a transfiguration exam, and you happen to be sitting right next to them with an extra set of notes. She wouldn't have passed without my help. He paused, his grin turning mischievous. So, I think it's about time I cash in on that favor. You were beginning to see where this was going, and it made your heart race with anticipation. What's she going to do? Leo pulled out a tiny vial from his robe pocket, the liquid inside swirling in a ghostly, shimmering silver. Invisibility draft. She picked it up from Hogsmeade last weekend. Apparently, it only lasts for about 10 minutes, but with the right timing, I'm thinking we can slip into the restricted section unnoticed, right past Madame Ashworth. You stared at the vial, barely able to contain your excitement. It was perfect. The invisibility draft, combined with your timing and Leo's quick thinking, could work. It was risky, but that was part of the thrill. Okay, you said, nodding. But once we get in, what then? We can't just waltz up to the book and grab it. There must be wards, enchantments, something that will try to stop us. Leo's face took on an almost predatory look. That's where you come in, my daring Gryffindor friend. You're the one who can think on your feet when things go wrong. If anyone can outsmart a magical ward, it's you. The words were a little more than flattery. Leo trusted you, trusted your ability to think fast, to improvise when things took a wrong turn. That trust, that bond of friendship, was the foundation of every adventure you'd ever embarked on together. You chuckled, more than a little smug at the compliment. All right, you get us in, I'll handle the magic. But I get first dibs on the book. It will be our secret. Leo raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. First dibs, huh? Fine. But when we're legends, don't forget who got us there. You grinned, your eyes alight with excitement. Deal. Let's make history, Leo. As the plan began to take shape, the tension was palpable. The thought of the danger, the unknowns, only fueled the fire burning in your chest. This was it, the adventure you had been waiting for. But deep down, you couldn't help but wonder, what would you uncover in the restricted section? Would it be more than you bargained for? The answer, like the adventure itself, was just waiting to be discovered. The Library Heist. The cold air in the castle felt sharper as you and Leo slipped out of the Gryffindor common room, the dim light of the hallway flickering in the distance. The night was darker than usual, as if the castle itself were holding its breath. Every step you took felt heavier, the quiet of the castle pressing down on you, as though even the walls were conspiring against your mission. You tried to steady your breathing, but the excitement and the danger made it impossible to stay calm. Are you sure this is going to work? Leo whispered, his voice barely audible as he checked the vial of invisibility draft in his pocket. You gave him a quick nod. I trust you. Just stick to the plan, and we'll be fine. The potion was already coursing through your veins, a cold, shivery feeling settling over your body as your form began to blur, the edges of your body dissolving into the shadows. You could still feel your presence, but it was like you were slipping between worlds, partially there, but hidden from view. Leo followed suit, and within moments, The two of you were completely invisible to anyone who might be passing by. The corridors were eerily silent as you crept down toward the library, your footsteps muffled against the cold stone floors. The usual chatter of students, the rustle of papers, and the sounds of magic at work seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive quiet of the night. Even the flickering torches on the walls seemed to burn more faintly, as if they were dimming in anticipation of what you were about to do. You reached the main entrance to the library, the large wooden doors standing before you like an ominous threshold. Beyond them lay the secrets you had been chasing, the forbidden books, the dark magic locked away, waiting for someone daring enough to unlock them. But standing between you and your goal was one obstacle: Madame Ashworth, the librarian. Her strict demeanor and hawk-like gaze were enough to keep even the most daring students from even considering a late-night venture into the library. And tonight, as you cautiously pressed your ear to the door, you could hear her voice echoing softly in the distance, her lantern swinging back and forth as she patrolled the aisles. She was closer than you expected, and every sound she made seemed to magnify in the stillness of the night. "Stay close," you whispered to Leo, your heart racing. You could feel the cold sweat gathering at the back of your neck. If Madame Ashworth caught you, your adventure would be over before it had even begun. You glanced at Leo, his figure slightly translucent in the moonlight, and saw him give a small nod in return. The tension between you was palpable, the weight of the moment settling in. This was the point of no return. With a deep breath, you pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The scent of old books and dust filled the air, the familiar mustiness of the library enveloping you in a blanket of mystery. The moonlight spilled through the tall arched windows, casting long spectral shadows across the rows of towering bookshelves. The soft rustle of the pages and the occasional sigh of the ancient wood creaked in the silence, as if the library itself were alive, watching, waiting. The restricted section was close. You could feel its presence as you crept deeper into the library, each step a silent whisper. But Madame Ashworth's footsteps were louder, closer now. You could hear the faint click-clack of her shoes as she passed down the aisle, the faint glow of her enchanted lantern swaying with each of her movements. You held your breath, each sound like a hammer against your eardrums. Your heart thudded in your chest, and for a moment you were sure she could hear it. Leo's breath hitched beside you, and you turned to find him staring at you, his eyes wide with concern. You signaled for him to stay still, feeling the cool tension in the air thicken. This was the moment when everything could go wrong, the moment when one misplaced sound, one small mistake, could send everything crashing down. Madame Ashworth moved closer, her lantern bobbing in the darkness like an unblinking eye. Your hands felt clammy, but you forced yourself to stay calm, your fingers curling tightly around your wand. You had to be patient, to wait for the right moment to move. The shelves loomed around you, tall and imposing, their shadows long and dark. Every inch of this place seemed to pulse with ancient secrets, the knowledge of centuries trapped within. As Madame Ashworth passed by, you took your first step toward the restricted section. Your feet moved with slow precision, avoiding the creaky floorboards, avoiding any movement that might give you away. You glanced over your shoulder to see Leo following, his form nearly invisible in the dim light. his every movement as careful and calculated as your own. The gates to the restricted section were just ahead, the iron bars twisted with magic, glowing faintly in the dark. You felt the pull of them. This was it, the culmination of your plan, the moment of truth. But even as you approached, your stomach twisted with unease. The air seemed thicker here, heavier with the weight of the forbidden knowledge behind those doors. The lock was complex, enchanted beyond the reach of simple spells. But you had known this would be the case. Leo's instructions had been clear. Find the key, get past the wards, and get us inside. Simple enough, right? But your heart sank when you saw it, the heavy brass lock that stood between you and your goal. There was no time to waste. You reached into your pocket for the key Trixie had given Leo. Your only way in. Your fingers trembled as you slid the cold metal into the lock, the satisfying click echoing through the room. The enchantments on the gate rippled and faded, the magic dissolving at the touch of the key. The gates creaked open slowly, each inch a triumph. You motioned for Leo to follow, and as the two of you stepped inside, you felt the weight of the magic pressing in around you. The shelves of the restricted section stretched out before you, their dark spines calling to you with 1,000 untold stories. And somewhere in the sea of ancient knowledge lay the book you had come for. But even as you moved deeper into the shadows, a whisper of unease lingered in your chest. The danger wasn't over. Not yet. The forbidden book. The moment you stepped into the restricted section, the very air seemed to change, growing heavier and colder, as though the ancient knowledge contained within these walls was aware of your presence. The lantern light flickered in the dark, casting long, ghostly shadows that seemed to stretch toward you, as if the room itself were alive, waiting, watching. The shelves stretched high into the darkness, crammed with old tomes, their spines cracked and their pages yellowed with age. 1,000 whispers seemed to float just out of reach, their words lost in the labyrinth of forbidden lore. The silence was almost suffocating. You felt Leo's presence beside you, his breath shallow as he, too, seemed to be drawn into the mystery of the place. His eyes darted nervously, scanning the rows of books. There was something here, something in the air that made every instinct in your body scream to turn back. But you couldn't. Not now. You had come this far. Ahead of you, the shelves seemed to shift in the dim light, as if they were opening to reveal something hidden in the depths. Your heart quickened, and then you saw it. A small alcove tucked in the farthest corner of the room. The book was there, resting on a pedestal, bathed in the faint glow of the lantern. The sight of it sent a shiver down your spine. It was as if the book was calling to you. The air around the pedestal felt thick, charged with an energy you couldn't quite place. You felt it before you even stepped closer. The weight of the magic, the strange pull it had on you. It was like a force, something ancient and powerful, tugging at your very soul, beckoning you forward. The book itself seemed to shimmer in the dim light, its cover dark and aged, cracked like an ancient artifact, its binding wrapped in a faintly glowing silver thread. Is that? Leo's voice was barely a whisper, his words trailing off as his eyes locked onto the book. You nodded, though your throat was dry. That's it. The book. The one Vance was talking about. As you stepped closer, the temperature seemed to drop, and the shadows seemed to curl tighter around the book. It felt like the room was closing in, the very walls pressing against you. The air was dense with something alive. Your breath came in shallow gasps, and yet, despite the creeping unease in your chest, you couldn't pull your gaze away. You reached out, almost instinctively, your fingers trembling as they brushed against the cover. A jolt of cold energy shot through you at the contact, as though the book had recognized you. For a moment, you thought you could hear a soft murmur, like the rustle of pages turning, or a whisper too faint to fully comprehend. The sound was like a thread winding through your mind, tugging at something deep inside of you. Leo was staring at you now, his eyes wide with the same strange mix of fear and fascination. "Are you okay?" he whispered. His voice seemed muffled, as if the book itself was swallowing the sound of the world around you. You couldn't finish your sentence. The words caught in your throat as your fingers curled around the book's spine, pulling it toward you. It felt wrong, yet so right, as if the very act of touching it had awakened something in your chest, something that longed to know what secrets lay within. With a low, almost imperceptible creak, the book opened, its pages rustling like the dry leaves of an ancient forest. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as though the book was speaking directly to your mind. "Read me." The command echoed through your thoughts, sharp and compelling. You felt your pulse quicken as your eyes traced the words on the page. Strange symbols and arcane scripts that you couldn't understand, but felt drawn to nonetheless. The words were like a lure, tugging at the edges of your consciousness. You couldn't stop yourself. Your eyes swept across the page, the letters twisting and writhing, as though they were alive. The ink seemed to shimmer, shifting as you watched. It felt as though the book was pulling you deeper into its mysteries, wrapping itself around your mind like an unshakable grip. A coldness settled in your bones as the whispers grew more distinct, no longer just a murmur, but an almost audible voice in the corners of your mind. Power, forbidden, magic, forgotten. The price for knowledge. Will you pay it? Your breath hitched, and for the first time, a real sense of dread crept into your veins. You tore your eyes away from the page, looking over at Leo, but his face was pale, his gaze fixed on the book. He hadn't spoken. "Leo," you whispered, your voice unsteady. But he didn't respond. His expression was vacant, his pupils dilated. It was as though the book had taken hold of him too, pulling him into its web of mystery. The pages turned of their own accord, and the air grew thicker, the temperature dropping even further. The room seemed to pulse with the book's power, a dark, rhythmic thrum that seemed to come from the very heart of the book. You could feel it deep in your chest, a pressure building, pushing against your ribs. The whispers grew louder. The words on the page were no longer indecipherable. They seemed to speak to you, offering visions, promises, and something more. Something dangerous. Power at your fingertips. Knowledge no one has ever dared to seek. You wanted to look away. You wanted to run, to throw the book back and bolt for the door. But the pull was stronger than your fear. Your hand tightened around the cover, unwilling to release it. You didn't know what you were doing, what you had started. But every fiber of your being screamed for you to keep reading, to know what lay hidden within. The room felt alive now, as though the very stones of the library were breathing with you, their ancient energy rising in the darkness. It was intoxicating, a drug that you couldn't resist. Every word seemed to lure you deeper into a place where the line between right and wrong blurred, where the consequences of your actions no longer mattered. The book had you, its magic holding you in a vice, and you didn't know how to escape. And just as the weight of the magic seemed to settle over you, a voice broke through the silence. It wasn't Leo. It wasn't the whispers from the book. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Someone was coming, and you knew the danger wasn't over. A terrifying encounter, just as the words on the page of the forbidden book seemed to be sinking into your soul, pulling you deeper into the shadows. A cold realization hit you. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoed through the hushed aisles of the library. Your heart slammed against your chest, the tension between your ribs unbearable. You froze, every muscle in your body stiffening in place. Beside you, Leo was still staring at the book, his eyes glazed, his mouth slightly open as if under a spell. He hadn't noticed the danger yet, hadn't sensed the shift in the air. But you did. With a sharp inhale, you quickly snapped the book shut, the heavy thud of its pages hitting the cover, cutting through the stillness like a thunderclap. Your pulse raced. The footsteps were getting closer. Whoever was coming was moving fast, their presence growing more menacing with every step. You and Leo remained as still as statues, the shadows of the library wrapping around you like a thick blanket. The flickering light from the lanterns cast unsettling shadows on the walls, twisting and distorting, making the library feel less like a place of learning and more like a tomb. Through the veil of your nerves, you turned to Leo, your mouth dry, but your words were barely a whisper. Leo, we're not alone. Someone's here. You could hear the fear creeping into your voice, a sharp contrast to the excitement you'd felt moments ago. Leo didn't respond. His eyes were still locked on the closed book in your hands, but you could see his pupils dilate, his body tense. He had finally heard it, the approaching footsteps, the same threat that sent a cold shiver down your spine. The footsteps stopped suddenly. You dared a quick glance toward the source of the sound, your breath catching in your throat as you saw a dark figure step out from the shadows. It was Vance Dupont, the last person you wanted to see in the restricted section. Vance was a sixth-year Slytherin, a notorious troublemaker, and more than just a rule-breaker. He thrived on chaos. His reputation for bending every rule Hogwarts had to offer was legendary. If there was a way to break a rule, Vance had likely found it. And worse still, he enjoyed it. His smug expression, his self-assured stride, it all made him a dangerous, unpredictable force. But tonight, something about him felt different. His usual cocky swagger was absent, replaced by a kind of frantic energy, the kind of energy that screamed of danger. His usual smirk had twisted into a grimace, and his eyes, wide and almost frantic, locked onto the book in your hands. You barely had time to think. You could feel the tension in your chest rising, a palpable weight that threatened to suffocate you. Vance was standing just a few paces away, his gaze fixed on the book, his fingers twitching, as though he couldn't decide whether to lunge for it or to retreat. You were out of your depth. Well, well, well. Vance's voice slithered through the silence, his tone cold, laced with something darker than his usual arrogance. Looks like I'm not the only one with an interest in this. His eyes flicked between you and Leo, the glint of recognition dawning in his gaze. You too, always getting into trouble, aren't you? The words hit you like a punch to the stomach. It was clear now. Vance had been following you, had been waiting for the moment to catch you in the act. And now that he had, his presence felt like a looming storm, every inch of his being exuding a danger you hadn't anticipated. You tried to steady your breath, but the rising sense of dread wouldn't let up. Vance. You started, but your voice faltered. He smirked, but it wasn't his usual confident grin. No, this time there was something wild in his expression, something almost desperate. His hands twitched as if fighting the urge to grab the book himself. You think you can outsmart me? No one's faster than me when it comes to getting what they want, he said, his words barely a growl. Leo shifted beside you, his body rigid, his hand still near his wand. But he didn't draw it. Not yet. Vance stepped forward, his boots clicking sharply against the stone floor. The sound sharp and ominous in the silence. I was here first, you know, he continued, his gaze still locked on the book. I've spent weeks researching it, trying to unlock its secrets. I'm closer than anyone else. And now you just waltz in and think you can claim it. Not gonna happen. The air grew heavier with each word, and a shiver ran down your spine. There was something in the way Vance's voice trembled slightly, in the way his eyes darted from you to the book and back again, that told you this wasn't just about pride or winning. He was scared of what the book could do, what it could reveal, and that terrified you more than anything. Look, Vance, Leo said, his voice quiet but steady. We're not here to cause trouble. We just... He glanced at you, his voice faltering slightly, unsure how to explain this madness. But Vance wasn't listening. Shut up, Lockmere, Vance spat, his voice laced with venom. His hand reached out, fingers trembling slightly as they hovered just over the book. I've come too far. I won't let you stop me. And then, just as his fingers brushed the edge of the book, a soft, guttural sound escaped from the pages. A whisper. It wasn't the soft rustling you'd heard before. No, this was something different. It was louder now, like an almost audible voice calling from within the book, rising from its pages, demanding attention. Stop, you whispered, your voice cracking with the weight of the moment. Something wasn't right. Vance's eyes snapped up, wide with horror. His hand pulled back like he'd been burned, and his breath hitched as he staggered backward. It's alive, he muttered under his breath, his face turning pale. You could see the fear in his eyes now. It was real, raw, and it made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. And then, the book moved. The pages began to turn on their own, the ink swirling in patterns, shifting, becoming something darker, something older than anything you could comprehend. The room seemed to close in around you, the air thickening, as though the walls themselves were pressing in, suffocating you. You were in over your head. This wasn't just about sneaking into the library or grabbing a book. It was something far more dangerous than you had ever imagined. And now, standing in front of the very thing you had sought, you weren't sure you could stop it. Run, Leo muttered, his voice barely a whisper. But it was too late. Vance's hand shot out toward the book again, his desperation palpable. You wanted to stop him. You needed to stop him. But all you could do was watch as the book seemed to come alive in front of you, its secrets clawing their way out into the world. The transformation, the air around you thickened, the weight of the magic in the room pushing against your chest. You could feel the pressure mounting, each breath becoming harder to take as the situation spiraled further out of control. Vance's hands hovered over the forbidden book, his wide, fearful eyes flicking between you, Leo, and the swirling pages that seemed to pulse with a dark energy all their own. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, Leo took a step forward, his voice calm, though his hand trembled slightly as it gripped his wand. "I don't think you understand, Vance," he said, his tone dripping with an eerie calmness that did nothing to ease the growing sense of dread. "We're not the ones you need to worry about right now." For a split second, there was a flash of uncertainty in Vance's eyes, but it quickly disappeared, replaced by a scowl. "What do you mean?" he snarled, his voice a low growl. Before you could stop him, Leo raised his wand, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "I think it's time you learn just how dangerous we really are," he said, his words laced with a bit too much confidence for your liking. The air around you seemed to hum, crackling with an energy you couldn't quite place. And then, with a swift flick of Leo's wrist, the world around you shifted. "Faraverto denio gorio," Leo muttered under his breath, the incantation rolling off his tongue like a secret. The words were thick with ancient power, and as they left his lips, a wave of magic washed over the both of you. The change was instant. You could feel it before you saw it, your body twisting and contorting as the magic surged through you. You gasped, the sensation so overwhelming that it knocked the air out of your lungs. Your hands felt cold and alien, your fingers elongating, thickening, and growing sharp. The ground beneath you seemed to shift as your height grew, your shoulders broadening, your chest expanding. And as you glanced down at your body, you saw the horror take shape. Your skin began to stretch, taking on a pale grayish hue, while your nose and ears shifted. You could feel them elongating, your fingers turning to claws, sharp and grotesque. Your eyes burned with a strange glow, and your lips curled back in a monstrous grin. Except, it wasn't your grin anymore. It was something else, something unrecognizable. "Leo, what the hell did you do to me?" You gasped, the words coming out in a guttural growl, far from your usual voice. But Leo, standing beside you, looked far too pleased with himself. The look of sheer amusement on his face was almost enough to make you forget about the horror of your own transformation. Almost. "Well, I thought you'd like a new look," Leo said, his voice light-hearted and mocking. "Don't worry, mate, it'll wear off." The probably didn't do much to calm your nerves. You looked around, your new monstrous form looming over Leo like a hulking shadow. The library was still eerily quiet, save for the soft rustling of the book's pages, now fluttering as though it were alive. But now you were seeing it from a different angle, your head almost touching the top of the bookshelves as you loomed over them like an oversized, grotesque figure. The transformation was unsettling, to say the least. Vance's reaction was instantaneous. His mouth dropped open, his eyes widening in a mix of disbelief and fear. He took a step back, his face pale and sweat beading on his forehead. "What the hell is that?" he stammered, his voice rising in pitch as he stumbled backward. "What What did you do to him? You could feel the magic swirling around you, coursing through your new body, but something about the change felt off. Deep down, there was a gnawing sensation, a growing realization that you had crossed a line you couldn't easily undo. What had Leo unleashed? What had you both unleashed? Just a little transformation spell, Leo replied, sounding far too casual for the situation. Figured it might help with the intimidation factor. And it did. The moment Vance saw your monstrous form, the color drained from his face. The smug, confident bully who had always prided himself on bending the rules was now trembling before you, completely rattled. But as the seconds passed and the magic settled, the transformation didn't feel as funny as it had at first. It felt wrong. You felt wrong. The claws that now replaced your fingers scraped against the stone floor, each movement feeling foreign, the weight of your own body uncomfortably heavy. The sharp, elongated features of your face seemed to mock you in the shadows. This is a bad idea, you thought, your pulse quickening as the realization hit you. You hadn't asked for this. Leo hadn't meant for it to go this far, but you were both in the thick of it now. You had to survive the consequences, and that meant dealing with the nightmare you had just become. Vance, still staring at you in horror, visibly swallowed hard. I didn't sign up for this, he gasped, his voice cracking. You can't just change like this. You're not supposed to. His hands were shaking, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Leo laughed, a light, almost carefree sound that didn't match the growing tension in the air. Oh, I think he's a bit overwhelmed, Leo said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. But it's all right, Vance. We're just here to get the book. No hard feelings, right? You wanted to laugh too, but the laughter felt hollow in your chest. You had never felt so far removed from yourself. You weren't sure what kind of creature you had become, but you weren't sure if you could reverse it, even if you tried. Your monstrous reflection in the nearby bookcase was a harsh reminder of just how deep you'd gone into forbidden magic, and the road back seemed like a distant dream. Your clawed hand reached for the book again, but this time you hesitated. The weight of the moment settled on you. The book seemed to hum with a life of its own, its whispers beckoning you closer. It was like the book was more than an object. It was something alive, and it wanted you to open it. But you didn't know if you could. You could feel the pull, the need to discover what secrets it held. But the dark thoughts gnawing at your conscience stopped you. You weren't sure you could handle what was inside. Leo, you whispered, your voice more guttural than you intended. We need to stop. Now. The realization hit you that the magic you were playing with wasn't just a harmless prank. It was far more dangerous than you ever imagined. But Leo only smiled. I think it's too late for that. Vance's frightened gaze flicked between you and the book, and in that moment, you realized this was just the beginning, the escape, the moment. Vance turned on his heel and bolted. Panic surged through you. His footsteps echoed through the library like the drumbeats of impending doom. His voice, once filled with smug arrogance, was now a frantic scream. What have you done? What have you done? The book, your book, the one that had been the catalyst for this entire nightmare, slipped from his hands and crashed to the floor with a sickening thud. Pages flapped open, and the whispers from within grew louder, more desperate, as though the book itself was calling to you, begging to be read. "Leo, now," you barked, urgency making your words sharper than you intended. Leo didn't hesitate. His wand was already drawn, and with a single, quick flick, he cast a silencing charm, muting the noise of Vance's screams, but not the panic in his eyes. You could see the fear growing in Vance's face as he dashed toward the exit, nearly tripping over his own feet as he scrambled through the dark aisles of bookshelves, his hands clawing at the air. His footsteps grew fainter, but his voice, now a tortured howl, carried on the wind. You felt the weight of the transformation pressing down on you, the grotesque claws at the tips of your fingers, the distorted features of your face, the monstrous bulk of your new body. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a curse, a reminder that magic, when mishandled, had consequences far worse than any professor's reprimands. "We need to go," Leo whispered fiercely, his face a mask of focused determination. He grabbed your arm, the urgency in his movements unmistakable. "The book," he started, but you shook your head, your mind racing. "Leave it," you hissed. "We need to leave now. We're not safe here." The librarian, Madame Ashworth, was still somewhere in the library, and worst of all, Vance's screams would undoubtedly alert other professors. The stakes had never been higher. "You're right," Leo muttered, casting one last glance at the book that had turned everything upside down. His eyes flickered with hesitation, but then his hand shot out, and he pulled you into motion, leading the way toward the shadowed corridors near the back of the library. You could feel the tension in every step, the pulse of magic still lingering in the air, the low hum of the book's power vibrating through your chest. You were both running, but it wasn't just from Vance. It was from everything. The magic that had twisted you, the mistakes you had made, the dangers now rushing toward you. The door to the restricted section was just ahead. You pushed it open, its creaking sound almost deafening in the silence. You ducked through the doorway, Leo following close behind, and the heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that sent a shiver down your spine. The library was behind you, but the danger was far from over. "We need to keep moving," Leo whispered, urgently. His eyes darted over his shoulder, and he kept his steps quick, but measured. You could hear faint footsteps, the sound of frantic movement. Vance hadn't gone far. Your mind raced. The school was alive with magic, its walls imbued with secrets, but also with the constant surveillance of its professors. The corridors twisted and turned, leading deeper into the heart of Hogwarts. You could feel the eyes of the castle on you, watching, waiting for you to slip up. But right now there was no time to think, no time to wonder if you'd made the right choice in taking the book, or if you'd sealed your own fate by dabbling in forces far beyond your understanding. You rounded a corner, nearly colliding with a suit of armor. Your breath caught in your throat as you caught sight of the flickering light of Madame Ashworth's lantern in the distance. The unmistakable clink of her footsteps echoed in the hallway. You had to move faster. "Leo," you whispered harshly, your voice low but urgent. "She's coming." Without a word, Leo took your hand and led you to a nearby staircase that spiraled upward. The stairs creaked under your weight, each step carrying you further from the safety of the library and deeper into the maze of Hogwarts. Suddenly you heard it, a shrill scream from behind, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone falling. Vance's voice cracked, and the panic in his words only heightened your sense of urgency. They're coming. They're coming for me. You've all doomed us. The door at the top of the stairs was just ahead, and you could hear the wind howling through the cracks of the castle, its icy fingers reaching in to tug at you, urging you forward. You shoved the door open and stepped into the cold night air. The fresh breeze was a shock to your senses. You could feel the coolness on your skin, the sudden rush of freedom, but it didn't last. Leo was right behind you, his face tense, his eyes scanning their surroundings, with the precision of someone who had been in far too many tight situations. The sound of hurried footsteps from inside the castle reached your ears, and you knew you couldn't afford to linger any longer. You ran. The castle's towering form loomed behind you, its many windows like dark, watchful eyes. You darted toward the forbidden forest, the shadows deepening as you neared the trees. Every step felt heavy, weighed down by the fear that followed you, but also by the knowledge that there was no turning back. Leo, what now? You panted, your voice ragged from the adrenaline coursing through your veins. We keep moving, Leo answered, his tone sharp. We need to get as far away as possible before anyone realizes we're gone. You didn't hesitate, your feet pounding against the ground as you sprinted into the dark woods. The chill of the night air rushing past you, the forest embraced you, hiding you in its shadows. But you knew it wouldn't be enough. Not with the book still out there, still calling to you. What have we done? You thought to yourself as you pushed through the dense underbrush, the weight of the transformation still pulling at your body. The magic of the book, the magic Leo had unleashed, had only just begun. The consequences of your actions were far from over. But there was one thing you knew for sure. You weren't safe yet. The chase had only just begun. The question that gnawed at your mind, the one you couldn't shake, was simple. What would the book want next? Unsettling whispers. The forest pressed in around you, like a living entity, the trees towering overhead, their dark branches twisting into the sky like skeletal arms. Every step you took seemed to carry you deeper into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. The cool, damp air filled your lungs, but despite the chill, a sweat clung to your skin. Every breath felt heavier than the last, weighed down by something far more oppressive than the weight of the night. As you and Leo continued to sprint through the forest, the sound of Vance's panicked cries faded into the distance. The distant wail of his voice, barely audible now, was the last reminder of the chaos you'd left behind. Still, you couldn't shake the sense that you weren't alone in the dark woods, as if something was following you, something that couldn't be seen, but was ever present in the back of your mind. The book, the whispers, they started as faint murmurs, barely distinguishable over the rush of wind and the crackle of leaves beneath your feet. But then, they grew louder, closer. At first, you thought it was just your mind playing tricks on you. The aftermath of the magic you had unleashed, the transformation Leo had cast on you still felt fresh. The grotesque shape of your body, alien and unwelcome. But then the whispers called to you again, sharper now, their voices almost real. Open it, they whispered, their voices smooth and coaxing, like a voice in your ear you could never escape. The words were indistinct, but the meaning was clear. It wants you to open it again. You stumbled, your foot catching on a root hidden in the darkness. But Leo was already a few paces ahead, too focused on his own thoughts to notice your sudden unease. You could hear his heavy breathing, the faint, rustle of his cloak as he moved swiftly through the forest. But you couldn't focus on that, not with the whispers growing louder, swirling around you like an invisible storm. "We can give you power," the voices promised, sweet and enticing. "We can make you great." Your heart thudded harder in your chest, not from the running, but from the strange pull in the pit of your stomach. It was subtle at first, like a nagging thought you couldn't push away, but it intensified with every step. The book, those pages, held something more than mere words. There was power in it, power that was starting to feel necessary, as if you needed it. You had no idea what it would do, but you couldn't help but want to find out. Leo glanced back at you, his brow furrowed. "You okay?" he asked, his voice strained with exertion, but the question felt far away. His voice, once comforting, now seemed faint in the midst of the growing chaos inside your mind. The whispers drowned out his words, urging you onward, urging you to give in to that strange feeling in the back of your mind. You reached for your pocket, your fingers brushing against the book. It was still there, the weight of it tangible through the fabric of your cloak. It seemed heavier now, as though it had gained a life of its own, and the whispers became more insistent. "Why run?" they hissed. "It's already chosen you. You can't escape it. Open it. Read it. Let it make you more." You clenched your jaw and shook your head, trying to clear the thoughts. You didn't want to listen. You couldn't. The magic that had transformed you, had twisted you, was wrong. You had to ignore the book. You had to focus on getting away, getting safe. But even as you told yourself that, your hand trembled as it hovered over the book. The strange aura of its pages, calling to you. The voices were so clear now, so real. "You will understand it," they cooed. "You will see the truth. Let us show you." With every word, the pull grew stronger. You felt as if the book were no longer just an object. It was a part of you now, its presence becoming intertwined with your thoughts, its hunger pulling you closer to it. Your mind raced, and with it, the growing conflict that tore at your insides. You didn't want to open it. You didn't want to succumb to whatever dark power it offered, but the temptation gnawed at you. Every instinct inside you screamed no, yet the whispers promised that if you gave in, if you opened it, you would understand something far greater than anything you had known before. Power, knowledge, mastery, and somewhere deep inside, a part of you, the part you didn't want to admit was growing, wanted that. You could feel it now, an odd sense of attachment to the book, as though you had somehow already been bound to it, tied to its will. The warmth from the enchanted pages burned through the cloth of your cloak, and for a fleeting second, you thought you saw the outline of symbols, shapes, foreign and twisted, glowing faintly beneath your fingertips. "Leo," you whispered, your voice shaking, though you couldn't tell if it was from the cold or something else. "I don't know if we should be doing this." Leo stopped in his tracks, turning to face you, his eyes still full of determination, but now there was a hint of confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked, his brows furrowing. "What's going on?" You took a deep breath, trying to steady yourself. The whispers seemed to fade for a moment, but you could still feel their presence lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for you to slip, waiting for you to reach out again. I think the book is doing something to me," you confessed, your voice barely a whisper. "I can't stop thinking about it." The whispers, they're not stopping, Leo. It feels like it's pulling me in. Leo's expression hardened. Don't let it. Whatever it is, don't give in. You're not thinking clearly. The book, whatever it is, has control over you right now. It's magic, but it's dark magic. It will consume you. You nodded. But deep down, you didn't know if you could trust yourself anymore. The whispers had already gotten to you, and as much as you wanted to push them away, to keep running, you knew deep down that they wouldn't stop. They wouldn't let you. Open it. The voice in your head whispered again, softer this time, as if it were speaking directly into your soul. Let us show you the truth. You felt your resolve weakening. Leo, we have to. But before you could finish, a distant sound reached your ears. Faint at first, but growing louder. The unmistakable clink of boots on the stone, the rustle of robes in the dark. Madame Ashworth was still close. You snapped your hand away from the book. We can't stay here. We need to keep moving. Leo hesitated, a dark look crossing his face as he glanced down at your trembling form. But then, with a nod, he turned and led you deeper into the forest. The whispers followed, haunting, demanding, and with every step, they grew louder. You had no idea what would happen if you gave in, if you opened that book again. But a part of you feared you wouldn't have the choice. Not anymore. The reckoning, the cold night air bit at your skin. But it hardly seemed to matter. You and Leo trudged through the dense woods, the eerie silence of the forest now wrapped around you like a suffocating cloak. The rush of adrenaline had finally begun to ebb, leaving you with a heavy, unsettling calm. Your legs felt leaden, as if the weight of what had just happened was settling into your bones, pressing down on you with each step. The chaos of the library, the frantic scramble for the book, Vance's terrified screams, all of it now seemed distant, as if you had crossed some invisible line into a different world, a world where magic, in all its terrifying power, had a grip on you that you couldn't shake. And yet, despite the rush of the escape, despite the danger you had narrowly avoided, something inside you was still restless, haunted. Leo walked beside you, his steps quick but distracted, his usual carefree demeanor replaced by a serious, contemplative look. You could feel the tension in the air between you, but neither of you spoke. Words seemed inadequate now. The silence, thick and heavy, was punctuated only by the occasional crack of a branch underfoot, the distant hoot of an owl, and the soft rustling of leaves as the wind moved through the trees. You glanced at Leo, but he was staring straight ahead, lost in his thoughts, his brow furrowed. The faint glow of the moon barely illuminated his features, casting long shadows across his face. For a moment, you wondered what was going through his mind. You knew he'd be thinking about the same thing that consumed your own thoughts. The book. The book. It felt like an insistent pulse inside you, like a heartbeat you couldn't ignore. The whispers from its pages were still there, lingering just beneath the surface of your thoughts, beckoning you, calling you back to it. There was power there, something intoxicating, something that wanted to be unleashed. You shook your head, trying to clear the thoughts. You had to focus. You couldn't think about the book anymore. Not right now. You had just made it out of the library. You were alive. You had to stay focused on the here and now. But that didn't change the fact that the book was still there, tucked away in your cloak, just inches from your hand. It was tempting you, pulling at you, as though it were alive and aware of your every move. It was as if it knew you were thinking about it, and the more you tried to push the thoughts away, the more the whispers grew louder, more insistent. You felt a shiver run down your spine as the book's influence seemed to take hold again, this time not in your mind, but in your very soul. It was darker now, more powerful, and as much as you tried to resist, it was becoming harder and harder to fight its pull. Leo, help me. The thought was fleeting, but desperate. You glanced at him again, hoping to find the comfort you so desperately needed, but there was no reassurance to be found in his eyes. He looked just as lost as you, his expression etched with the same fear and uncertainty that had settled in your own chest. Leo, you finally whispered, your voice hoarse. What have we done? His eyes flickered to you, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowed his pace as though he, too, was struggling with the enormity of what had just happened. You both knew that there was no turning back from this. No matter how far you ran, the consequences of what you had done, what you had to do, would follow you. We got what we wanted, Leo said after a long moment, his voice steady but lacking its usual spark. But at what cost? That book, it's not just magic. It's something else, something darker. You nodded slowly, your throat tightening. I know. I felt it. The power. The pull. I couldn't stop thinking about it, Leo. Even when we were running, You wanted to open it. Leo finished for you, his words hanging heavy between you. You didn't, but I saw it in your eyes. You wanted to, and so did I. A pang of guilt shot through you. The truth was too clear now, too undeniable. It wasn't just the book that had a hold on you. It was the desire to understand it, to control it, to be more than you were. The book had tapped into something deep inside you, something primal and hungry. You could almost feel it thrumming against your chest, a heartbeat in sync with your own. What if we were meant to find it? You whispered, the words escaping your lips before you could stop them. What if the book was calling to us for a reason? Leo stopped walking, his head snapping toward you, his eyes wide in disbelief. Don't say that. You don't actually believe that, do you? You couldn't answer him, because deep down, you weren't sure what you believed anymore. Leo exhaled sharply and turned away, pacing the few steps before running a hand through his hair. The calm of the forest around you, the stillness of the night, only added to the mounting unease that gnawed at your insides. The danger wasn't over. The book was still out there, and sooner or later it would be found. The more we run, Leo muttered, the more I'm convinced that this won't end. We've opened a door that we can't close. You took a step closer to him, but your feet felt heavier with each passing moment. What do we do now? The book, it's still with me. I can't just forget about it. Leo turned to face you, his eyes sharp. We keep moving forward. We've gotten this far. There's no turning back. But I swear to you, we'll figure this out. We'll stop whatever is happening before it's too late. You wanted to believe him, needed to, but the nagging fear in the back of your mind wouldn't go away. The book wasn't just an object to be locked away or forgotten. It was alive, watching, and it would not let you go. A sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, and the whispers in your mind intensified, growing louder, more urgent, Your hand instinctively brushed against the book hidden beneath your cloak. The call grew stronger, almost suffocating, as if it were pushing you to reach for it again. I think it's too late, Leo, you said quietly, your voice barely a whisper in the wind. I think we've already lost. He didn't respond immediately, but you could feel the weight of his gaze on you. It was as though he too had realized the truth. In the distance, the faint sound of a bell tolled, the curfew bell signaling the end of another night at Hogwarts. But for you, it was the beginning of something much darker. And as you glanced at Leo, the shared fear between you was undeniable. The book had already changed you. It had already started its work. And as the whispers crept back into your mind, you knew the real reckoning was yet to come. The future was a shadow on the horizon, and it was coming for you, the price of curiosity. The morning after the heist felt colder than usual, despite the sun breaking through the clouds in sporadic beams. You sat at the Gryffindor table in the Great Hall, but the bustling chatter of students, the clinking of plates and forks, did little to pierce the fog in your mind. The warm aroma of freshly baked bread and sizzling bacon should have been comforting, but it felt distant, like you were floating just outside your own body, watching the world carry on without you. The book had a hold on you now, and you couldn't shake it. The whispers had quieted when you'd woken up, but they were still there, lurking just beneath the surface of your thoughts, waiting for the right moment to rise again. You felt their weight with every passing second, a slow, steady pressure building in your chest. The book wasn't just an object, it was a presence, something living and breathing that you could feel even now, pressing into your consciousness. Leo was sitting across from you, his usual smirk nowhere to be found. His eyes were distant, his jaw clenched tight as he picked at his food. He hadn't said much since last night, and you didn't need to be a genius to know he was struggling with the same feelings. The consequences of your actions had begun to settle in, and neither of you had a clear idea of how to handle it. Leo, you finally broke the silence, your voice quieter than you intended. Do you think we've made a mistake? He didn't look up from his half-eaten porridge. His fingers drummed against the edge of his plate, the only sign of his inner turmoil. I don't know, he muttered, his voice low, but I'm starting to think that the book, it's not something we should have messed with. You glanced down at your own plate, but your stomach twisted in knots. Food felt unnecessary now, a mere distraction from the growing sense of dread that gnawed at you from within. The book had been tempting, irresistible even. You'd felt its pull, the allure of forbidden knowledge, and you had given in, but now the weight of that decision was sinking in, slowly but surely. It wasn't just curiosity that had driven you to steal it from the restricted section. It was something darker, something more dangerous. Do you think we're in over our heads? You asked, a tinge of fear creeping into your words. What if it's already changing us? What if there's something we don't understand about it? Something we can't understand? Leo finally looked up at you, his eyes reflecting the same unease you felt. He didn't answer right away, as though the words themselves were too heavy to speak. He opened his mouth once, but no sound came out. Instead, he closed it, his brow furrowing deeper, and turned his gaze back to his food, as if staring at it would somehow make the weight of the situation lighter. We can't just forget about it, you said. the words falling from your mouth before you could stop them. We need to figure this out. We need to know what's really in it. Leo's eyes flicked toward you, and for a moment, you saw something dark flash across his face. You're still thinking about it, aren't you? He asked, his voice tight. You didn't respond immediately. You didn't need to. It was clear. The book was in your mind, clinging to your thoughts like a shadow. You could almost hear the faint rustle of its pages. The whispers that had called you before. They were so quiet now, but they were still there, just beneath the surface. You wanted to understand it. You wanted to open it again, to dive deeper into whatever secrets it held. But something in you hesitated. Something told you that whatever lay inside those pages wasn't something you were ready to face. Maybe we don't need to know, Leo continued, his voice softer now. Maybe we're better off leaving it where it is. The thought of just walking away from it, of turning your back on the book and pretending it hadn't consumed your thoughts, felt impossible. You think it's just going to let us walk away? You asked, your voice almost a whisper. We've already opened it, Leo. We've already seen part of what it can do. What if it's already too late? Leo's expression shifted, a hint of something, fear, flickering in his eyes. He ran a hand through his hair, pushing the strands back as if the simple action would clear his mind. I don't know, he admitted, looking almost helpless. But whatever happens next, we can't go back. We've tampered with things we shouldn't have. And now we're stuck with it. The words echoed in your mind as you stared blankly at the table. Stuck. There was no going back now, was there? You had opened the door, and now, it seemed, you had no choice but to walk through it. But at what cost? What had you really set into motion? The rest of the morning passed in a blur, the familiar sounds of Hogwarts seeming muffled and distant. Lessons were a haze. Even the whispers of the students around you, their excited chatter about the latest gossip or their class assignments, couldn't reach you. All you could think about was the book, the dark, forbidden knowledge it contained, and the price you had already begun to pay for your curiosity. You couldn't escape it. You could feel it gnawing at you from the inside, the gnawing sense that there was more to this than you had ever imagined. You had glimpsed its power, felt its pull, and now it was like a weight in your chest, an ache you couldn't soothe. It was as though the book had already taken a piece of you, leaving a hollow space inside that could only be filled by more of what it promised. In potions class, you barely paid attention. The bubbling cauldrons, the sharp, pungent smell of ingredients mixing together were all meaningless now. The professor's voice faded into the background as your mind raced. You were not in control anymore. You had given in to the temptation, and now the consequences were beginning to unfold. You're not focused today, Professor Mortimer said sharply, pulling you from your thoughts. Perhaps you should leave the curiosity to your classmates who can manage their assignments. You forced a tight smile and nodded, your hands shaking slightly as you turned back to your potion. The strange, unnerving presence of the book loomed in your mind, always there, always whispering. And with that thought, the truth hit you. This was only the beginning. The book had already begun to take its toll, and you were powerless to stop it. What had seemed like a thrilling adventure was now a haunting, consuming obsession. The cost of your curiosity was far greater than you had ever imagined. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but you didn't feel any relief. The world outside the bright hallways of Hogwarts felt distant and untouchable. The price of curiosity was more than just a stolen book. It was the inevitable pull of darkness that you could never escape, and it was only just beginning, a twist in fate. The days that followed blurred into one long, suffocating haze. You had expected the tension from the night of the heist to fade, but it only deepened with each passing hour. Every corner of Hogwarts seemed to hold a shadow of the book. Its presence in your mind was undeniable, its whispers slowly becoming more insistent, more urgent. The more you tried to ignore it, the louder the call became. At first, it was subtle. It crept into your thoughts when you least expected it, a flicker of an image, a half-heard phrase from the pages of the forbidden book. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. The line between your waking world and the dreams that had begun to plague you grew ever thinner. The book was in them too. Its ancient, mysterious text, its dark, unknowable power, twisting and curling through your every sleep. That night, as you drifted into uneasy slumber, you found yourself once again standing in the middle of the restricted section. The shelves loomed around you, stretching endlessly toward the ceiling, covered in dust and cobwebs. The book was there, its spine cracked, its pages torn, waiting for you. You reached for it, though you knew you shouldn't. It was almost as if the book was calling to you, luring you closer with a magnetic pull that you couldn't resist. As your fingers brushed against the cool leather cover, a strange sensation filled your chest, something cold and unsettling, like 1,000 forgotten memories waking from a long slumber. The pages fluttered open before you, revealing symbols you could barely comprehend. The whispers from the book began, low and murmuring at first, but growing louder, more insistent. You couldn't understand them, but you could feel them. Something ancient and powerful, twisting its way through your veins. Suddenly, the scene shifted. You were no longer in the library. You stood in a dark forest, the trees twisted and gnarled, their limbs reaching out like fingers to grab you. The air was thick with magic, something alive and watching. In the distance, you could see eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, moving closer and closer. The whispers turned into voices, the words now clear but incomprehensible, like a language from another world. The panic surged in your chest. You needed to run, to escape the forest, but your feet wouldn't move. The voices grew louder, and the shadows closed in, suffocating. Then, just as the darkness was about to overtake you, you woke, gasping for breath, your heart pounding in your ears. Your eyes snapped open, the room spinning slightly as you fought to steady your breathing. The Gryffindor dormitory was quiet, the flickering light of a distant torch casting long shadows across the stone walls. But the weight of the dream clung to you, its unease seeping into your bones. You could feel it in the air, like the remnants of the magic that had twisted the dream, now lingering around you, refusing to fade. You couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The book's power wasn't just confined to the pages. It was slowly infiltrating your reality, spreading like a creeping vine that refused to be cut back. The whispers that had haunted your dreams began to bleed into your waking thoughts. You could hear them sometimes, soft, almost imperceptible, fluttering in the back of your mind. And every time you heard them, you felt that same cold weight settle in your chest. In class the next morning, you found it harder to focus than usual. Potions was a blur of instruction, a haze of colors and smells that made little sense. Your mind kept drifting back to the book, to the feeling of its pages beneath your fingertips, to the strange weight in your chest. It was as if every word you heard, every image you saw was filtered through the book's influence. Leo had noticed it too. You could see the way his eyes flickered to you in the middle of class, the concern there, but he didn't say anything. Neither of you spoke about the book anymore, but it hung between you like a thick fog. There was a palpable tension, a sense of dread that neither of you could shake. That afternoon, as you made your way back to the Gryffindor common room, you found yourself walking slower than usual. The hallways were quieter now, the usual hum of conversation replaced by a disquieting stillness. The shadows seemed deeper, darker, and you swore you saw figures moving in the corners of your vision, only for them to vanish when you turned your head. The book's influence was everywhere. You passed by a group of students laughing in the corridor, but the sound seemed distant, muffled, as if coming from the other side of a wall. They didn't seem real. Nothing did. The world around you felt warped, as if it was slowly unraveling, and you were trapped in its descent. It wasn't until you reached the common room that you realized you had been walking without thinking, your hand instinctively reaching for the book, still tucked into your cloak. Your fingers brushed against it, and the cold shiver ran through you again. Stronger now, more urgent. You could hear the whispers in your head, clearer now, like a beckoning call. You sat down heavily in front of the fire, the warmth doing little to chase the chill from your bones. You stared at the flames, lost in thought. There was no denying it anymore. The book had changed something in you. The magic was real, and it was alive. And now it was inside you, pulling at you from the inside, making you question everything. Leo, you muttered under your breath, but the words felt hollow. The thought of sharing your fears with him seemed both necessary and impossible. Could you tell him how deeply the book had already begun to affect you? Could you tell him that it felt like the book itself was starting to control you, slowly but surely? A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, pulling you from your thoughts. You stood, walking over to the window and peering out into the dark courtyard. The castle loomed in the distance, its towers reaching into the sky like jagged claws. For a moment, you felt a strange pull toward it, toward something beyond the walls, something waiting for you. The book's whispers were louder now, its presence almost physical, a weight on your soul. You couldn't run from it. You couldn't escape it. It had become a part of you, and there was no going back. Whatever price you would pay for your curiosity was coming, and it was only just beginning to reveal itself. In that moment, you knew you were no longer in control. The book had taken root in your mind, and its magic would twist your fate in ways you could never have imagined. You had crossed a line, and now you would have to face whatever consequences awaited you, and you weren't sure if you were ready for it. The next adventure. The castle felt different now, like it had changed overnight, shifting beneath your feet, whispering secrets it hadn't shared before. Every shadow seemed deeper, every hallway longer. The walls of Hogwarts, once so familiar, now seemed to tower over you like giants, their stone faces cold and unyielding. The book was always there, like an invisible weight pulling you down, guiding you forward into the unknown. The whispers had grown louder in your head, more insistent, weaving into every thought, every dream. You couldn't escape it. It wasn't just the book's presence that lingered. It was the way it made you feel, like you were on the edge of something vast and dark, something that both terrified and exhilarated you. The power of it gnawed at your insides, urging you to seek out more of its knowledge, more of its forbidden truths. You could feel the pull, always there, always present, and it was becoming harder to ignore with each passing day. You spent the following days in a haze, drifting through classes, your mind a swirl of confusion and curiosity. The once bright halls of Hogwarts seemed suffocating now, the very air heavy with something you couldn't name. You were no longer the same person who had walked these halls just a week ago. The book had changed you, shaped you, and you didn't know if you were ready for whatever came next. Leo was quieter too. He had never been one to shy away from danger, but you could tell that even he was feeling the weight of what you'd uncovered together. His usual clever grin was absent, replaced by a thoughtful frown that he tried to hide behind his usual jokes and casual demeanor. But you knew him better than that. You could see the flicker of concern in his eyes whenever the subject of the book came up, but neither of you had spoken about it directly. Instead, there were fleeting moments, silent exchanges, the occasional glance that spoke more than words could. You knew that Leo was as drawn to the book's mystery as you were, but you also knew he was beginning to realize the danger it posed. Neither of you knew how to handle it, but the curiosity was consuming. You had opened the door, and now there was no closing it. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky above the castle turned a bruised shade of purple, you found yourself standing before the mirror in the Gryffindor common room, staring at your reflection. The room was quiet, save for the crackling of the fire and the distant chatter of students. You could hear their voices, but they felt distant, as if the world outside had faded away, leaving you alone with your thoughts. Your reflection looked the same, but you didn't feel the same. The weight of the book was still there, lurking in the back of your mind, and you could feel its pull even now, as though it were calling to you from beyond the mirror. You knew deep down that you couldn't simply walk away. The book had already taken root in your soul, and the more you resisted it, the stronger it seemed to become. You ran a hand through your hair, pushing back the stray strands, and let out a long sigh. The quiet was suffocating. You could hear the faint rustling of the pages in your mind, the eerie whispers curling through your thoughts, beckoning you closer to the unknown. I can't keep running from this, you whispered to your reflection, though the words sounded hollow even to you. The sound of footsteps broke your reverie, and you turned to see Leo standing in the doorway, his brow furrowed in that way that always meant he had something on his mind. He looked at you for a long moment before speaking, his voice quiet but firm. "We need to talk," he said, his eyes searching yours for something. Answers, perhaps, or understanding. You nodded slowly, stepping away from the mirror. "Yeah," you replied, the weight of the situation sinking in once more. "We do." Leo stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. His eyes never left you as he walked toward the fire, the flickering light casting shadows on his face. You could see the tension in his shoulders, the unease that had taken root in both of you. Neither of you spoke for a moment, the silence thick with unspoken words. Finally, Leo broke the silence. "What are we going to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We've gone too far, haven't we? There's no turning back now. You looked at him, the realization hitting you hard. There was no turning back. The book had changed everything, and you both knew it. The magic you had unleashed, the dangerous knowledge you had uncovered, it was already shaping your future, whether you liked it or not. I don't know, you admitted, your voice hollow. But we have to keep going. We have to find out what it all means. Leo looked at you, his gaze dark with uncertainty. What if it's too dangerous? What if we can't control it? What if we're already in over our heads? The words hung in the air, unanswered. You didn't know how to respond. Part of you wanted to turn away, to forget about the book and everything that had come with it. But another part of you, the part that had always craved adventure, that had always longed for something more, refused to let go. The book had unlocked something inside of you, something you couldn't ignore, no matter how much you wanted to. I think, you said slowly, we have to find out what's really at the heart of this. Whatever it is, we need to know. Leo didn't reply right away. He stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. For a moment, you wondered if he was second-guessing the path you were about to walk down together. But then he nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. All right, he said, his voice steady. But we do this carefully. We need to be smart about this. No more mistakes. You nodded, the weight of his words settling over you. Smart, caution. Those were the things you should have considered from the here start. But it was too late for that now. The die had been cast, and there was no escaping the path you had chosen. You had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As the fire crackled in front of you, the tension between you and Leo hung in the air, like an unspoken promise. Whatever came next, whatever consequences the book might bring, you were in it together. But deep down, you couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come, and that perhaps was the most unsettling part of all. The book wasn't done with you yet, not by a long shot.